Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Gonzalez here along with,
Mrs. McVale.
and we're going to talk to you today about measurement. Here's today's objectives. Use various tools to measure distances. Use half units when measuring distances. This is the metric system. In the metric system, today we're going to talk about 4 different units of measurement. We're going to start by talking about millimeter. This is the smallest unit of measurement that we're going to talk about today. It's used to measure very small things, less than the thickness of most coins. Next box over. Moving up. Centimeter is just a little bit bigger than millimeter, and it is used to measure small items like the thickness of a crayon or the length of a pattern block. If we keep going, the next unit up is meter. This is used to measure the height of a kitchen counter or the width of a door. And finally, the largest unit of measurement we're going to talk about today is kilometer, or kilometer, depending how you pronounce it. This is used to measure large distances, such as from one city to another. You'll notice on the bottom, I have some different equivalencies. We're not going to talk about this quite yet, but it's going to come up a little bit later on. There are 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter. There are 100 centimeters in a bigger unit of 1 meter. And there are 1,000 millimeters in 1 kilometer or kilometer. Now we're going to take a look at some examples. At the top there is a chart listing millimeter, centimeter, meter, and kilometer or kilometer. At the bottom of this slide here there are some pictures. We have a thickness of a dime, really thin here. We have a jam or jelly jar. We have a map which shows the distance from Los Angeles, California, all the way over to New York City. And we have the height of a horse. I want to think about 2 things. The first one is which would be the appropriate unit of measurement for the object? And the second thing, which tool would I use to measure it?
And Mrs. G, I should say we're actually looking for the distance around the jam jar, not the height of it. We want to find that distance around, otherwise known as circumference.
Yes, good point, because those are 2 very different ways of measuring. Let's start with the dime. Remember, we're talking about just the thickness of the dime. Do you think that would go in our very tiniest unit of millimeter? Would it be the next unit, centimeter? Would it be meter? Or would it be the largest unit, kilometer? It's going to go over here in millimeter. This is really tiny. If I were to measure the dime all the way across, then I might put it in centimeter. But because I'm looking at just the thickness, that's very small. This is going to be millimeter. As far as the tool, I would want to probably use a ruler and just line it from the bottom, measuring up. It's not going to be very big. Millimeters are those teeny tiny little lines on the ruler. If I wanted to measure all the way around the dime, then I would want something that could move, like a tape measure. But I don't. I'm just measuring from top to bottom, so I would use a ruler. Mrs. McPhail, what do you think about this jam jar? Where would it go?
I would put it in centimeters. To wrap, then I would use that tape measure too, actually, because I could wrap that tape measure around the outside of the jar because it's flexible, and I couldn't do that with just a standard ruler. But I definitely put it in centimeters to find the circumference or the distance around that jam jar.
All right, let's take a look at the distance between cities. That's a really large distance. I would have to go on an airplane if I was taking a vacation. It would take me a long time to fly in an airplane.
Super long time.
Or days and days if I traveled by car. Where do you think that would go, Mrs. McPhail?
I totally think kilometer, or the other way you say it.
Kilometer.
Kilometer.
Sure. Why do you think that?
Because it's a really far distance, and I think measuring it with a yardstick or a ruler or a tape measure would be really difficult.
I agree. And what do you think this little thing up here at the top is?
Well,
this picture.
I've seen it before. I've seen it in my car, and so I think it's called an odometer.
Oh, yeah. I know what an odometer is. That's for when you measure miles or kilometers.
Yeah. So like when you drive across the country from Los Angeles to New York City.
Okay, perfect. All right, we're talking about equivalencies, and I know that 1 centimeter equals 10 millimeters. That would be the distance from the edge of the ruler over to the number 1, right here. That would be 1 centimeter. And I can see that there are 10 tiny little millimeter marks in this 1 centimeter. My question is, right down here at the bottom, how many millimeters would there be in 2 centimeters? So I know that there are 10 in 1 centimeter. If I make one more jump of 10, I would know that there are 20 millimeters in those 2 centimeters of length.
All right, so we've talked about the metric system. Now we're going to take a look at the U.S. customary system of measurements. And these you're probably a little bit more familiar with. We have the inch. This is our smallest one in the customary system. We're going to use it to measure small things like the length of a paper clip. If we get a little bit larger, we have the foot, which is used to measure small items like maybe the length of a ruler or the length of your math journal. A yard, which is bigger yet, used to measure the width of a door. And finally, the biggest one that we're going to use, at least here to talk about, is the mile. And that is used to measure large distances from, as you mentioned before, like one city to another. So you can see some of these are kind of coming in from before, same objects, just a different system of how we're going to measure them. And at the bottom, we have some equivalencies here. 12 inches is equal to 1 foot. Think of your ruler for that. 3 feet is equal to 1 yard, so think of that yardstick. And then 1,760 yards is equal to 1 mile. So kids, when you're running that mile run, keep that in mind. 1,760 yards. Ooh, 1,760 yards. They almost caught me, Mrs. Gonzalez. I said the word "and" in there. It's not a decimal.
You're right.
All right, same thing here in the customary system. We have our tools on the top: ruler, tape measurer, yardstick, odometer. Which tool would you use to measure these objects? I'm going to start with the beach ball. Mrs. Gonzalez, where do you think the beach ball would go?
Well, the beach ball's round, so I'm going to need something flexible rather than something stiff and straight. So for the tool of measurement, I think I would need a tape measure. And looking up at our chart, that leaves me 2 choices, either inches or feet. I think that beach ball probably could go in inches, but maybe it could go feet. I'm not real sure. Can you help me out with this one?
How about we just put it on the line?
Oh, good.
I think it could be both ways, depending on the size or the actual circumference or the distance around that beach ball. But I think it could go either place.
Yeah, good call, because I've seen some beach balls are really little where I definitely use inches, but ones that are bigger for the swimming pool, it might be over a foot.
Yeah, I agree. Let's take a look at, I'm going to let you guys decide where we would put the door. And I'm just going to go to our next slide.
Yeah.
For sake of time. Hey, Mrs. Gonzalez.
Hey, what?
Meow.
Meow.
Look at this cool cat. Okay, the cool cat says that there's 3 feet in 1 yard, and there are 12 inches in 1 foot. He's kind of giving us a little reminder as we do this page.
Reminders are helpful.
Yes. So, we want to find out some equivalencies down below. We are looking at 2 yards and trying to figure out how many feet would be in 2 yards. So if we think back, and actually if we look at our little reminder cat up here, I'm going to call him Reminder Cat, we know that 3 feet is equal to 1 yard, or if you need to see it the other way, 1 yard, I'm going to write shorthand, is equal to 3 feet. Ooh, that's kind of messy. So how many yards would be equal, or 2 yards would be equal to how many feet? So if you just double the yard, you would have to double the feet. So instead of 3, if you double 3, you would get 6 feet.
That's helpful to think that you can switch it around too.
Yeah. Okay, here's a super tricky one. 1 foot 4 inches is equal to how many inches? So we're keeping it in inches, but it looks like we have a little bit more than a foot here. So let's look back at the top, and we can see that we have 12 inches in 1 foot, or 1 foot with my shorthand, foot abbreviation, is equal to 12 inches. So I already know that in 1 foot, I have 12 inches. And it looks like I just have to add on 4 more. So it just becomes an addition problem now. So 12 inches plus 4 inches would give me 16